Some people in my family still think I overreacted. After everything you are about to hear, I want you to decide for yourself. It was Thanksgiving. My parents had been hinting for weeks that they had something important to tell me, something they had been carrying for a long time and could no longer hold. I assumed it was about their health. My mother had seemed tired at her last visit, and my father had started calling more often than usual, which he never does. So when they called in October and said they needed everyone together for the holiday, I made the drive, I packed a bag, I arranged for my daughter Camille's overnight things, and I showed up at that table the way I always did, quietly, with a smile, already bracing myself. What I did not plan for was my 8-year-old daughter sitting on the top step of my parents' staircase in the dark, her knees pulled to her chest, listening to every single word. My parents had asked me to come early that Wednesday evening, before the rest of the family arrived Thursday morning. They said they wanted to talk privately. I told Camille she could nap upstairs in the guest room while the grown-ups visited. I tucked her in. I kissed her forehead. I came back downstairs, poured myself a glass of water, and sat at the dinner table across from the two people who raised me. They told me I was adopted, that my biological parents had abandoned me, that I had never been theirs by blood, only by choice. And then my father said something I have not been able to fully process even now, weeks later, sitting here trying to find the words for it. He said they thought I deserved to know, before the holidays, before anything else happened with the estate. I stood up slowly. Not because I was calm, though I must have looked it. I stood up because staying seated felt impossible. My legs just moved. I walked toward the staircase with some vague idea of going upstairs, of getting some air, of getting distance from the table. And that is when I saw her. Camille, sitting at the top of the stairs in her socks, her little face half in shadow, staring down at me with an expression I had never seen on her before. She whispered one word. She said, "Mama?" That one word in that particular voice, on that particular night, is what this entire story is really about. They were escorted out before dessert was ever served. But to understand why that happened, and why I was the one who made it happen, and why I had been quietly building toward that moment for almost 3 years without anyone in my family knowing, I need to take you back to where this actually started. Let me tell you how we got here. I am Nora Scott. I am 38 years old. I am a real estate transaction coordinator turned independent property consultant. And for the better part of the last 4 years, I have been running a consultancy out of my home office that my family believes is a part-time hobby. I have never corrected that assumption. Not once. I had reasons for that, reasons I will get to, but the short version is this. In my family, there is a version of me that was written a long time ago, and nobody wanted to revise it. I was the second child. My older brother, Dominic Graves, is 4 years older than me and has been the center of the family's gravitational pull for as long as I can remember. He is handsome and loud, and he went to state school on an academic scholarship and built a reasonably successful career in insurance sales, and that was enough to make him the blueprint, the standard, the proof of concept. Then there was me. I was quieter. I changed my major twice. I graduated a semester late. I moved to a city 3 hours away at 24 and did not come back except for holidays, which my family interpreted as me struggling rather than me building. For 15 years, they have believed I was doing fine but not great. Getting by, making it work. Not quite living up to what they had hoped for, but they loved me and they kept the door open. And whenever I came to dinner, someone would ask in a gentle, careful voice how things were going, the way you ask someone who has been sick how they are feeling. My mother, Lorraine Graves, is the kind of woman who leads with kindness and follows with expectation. She is not cruel. I want to be clear about that. She is not a villain in the way that word usually works. She is a woman who grew up believing that love is best expressed through management, and that if you really care about someone, you point out the gaps. She did that with me constantly. She meant it as investment. I experienced it as inventory. My father, Gerald Graves, is quieter. He has always deferred to my mother in matters involving the children, and matters involving the estate, and matters involving what constitutes a successful life. He is not a bad man. He is a man who learned to go along with the current rather than swim against it, and for most of my life, the current ran straight past me. The first time I understood how little they saw me was 10 years ago. I was 28 and had just closed my first major consulting contract, a commercial property transaction in Riverside County worth just over $400,000 in total value. My commission was not enormous, but it was mine, and I was proud enough that I mentioned it at Easter dinner. My mother nodded and said that sounded promising, and then asked whether I had considered getting a position with an established firm because freelancing was so unpredictable. My father agreed. Dominic changed the subject to something about his territory numbers at work. I did not argue. I picked up my fork and I kept eating. But I went home that Sunday and I called my accountant, a methodical and thorough woman named Joyce Ackheffer, and I told her I wanted to start structuring my income differently. I wanted a paper trail that was mine alone. I wanted to build something that could not be dismissed with a nod and a pivot to someone else's territory numbers. That was the first stone in the foundation. The second incident happened about 3 years later. I had been growing the consultancy steadily, and I had begun investing a portion of my income into a college fund for Camille, who was 4 at the time. I had opened a 529 account in her name, and I had been making regular contributions, building it slowly, methodically, the way Joyce had recommended. By that point, the account had accumulated just over $65,000, and I had not mentioned it to anyone. At Christmas that year, my mother sat down next to me after dinner and said, in her gentlest voice, that she had been thinking about Camille's future. She said that she and my father had discussed it, and they wanted to contribute to her education someday, maybe set up a small fund, and that they thought it would be a good idea if they managed it since, as she put it, financial planning had always been something I struggled with. She patted my hand when she said it. I smiled. I said that was very thoughtful of her. I did not mention the $65,000 already growing quietly in Camille's name, or the automatic monthly contribution I had set up 18 months earlier. I let my mother believe she was rescuing a situation that did not exist. If you have ever been counted out by someone who should have known better, you know exactly what that silence feels like. You know how it sits in your chest like a stone you choose not to throw. The third incident is the one that made me stop coming home for minor holidays. About 2 years after the Christmas conversation, Dominic got married to a woman named Beverly Osai, and the wedding was beautiful, and at the reception my aunt pulled me aside and told me that my parents had given Dominic and Beverly a gift of $200,000 toward a down payment on a house. Not a loan. A gift. And she told me this the way people share gossip they find delicious, which was that she assumed I already knew. I did not already know. When I asked my mother about it later that week, she said they had done it because Dominic was building something stable and they wanted to support that, and that they hoped someday there would be something to offer me too when my situation was more settled. My situation. I drove home that night with my hands steady on the wheel and my mind doing arithmetic. Not because I needed the money. I did not. By that point, my consultancy had been generating consistent 6-figure annual income for 2 years, and I had been reinvesting a significant portion of it into 2 small investment properties in the Inland Empire, the kind of unshowy assets that do not announce themselves but grow quietly over time. The first property had been purchased for $320,000 in a neighborhood that had been undervalued and was not going to stay that way. I had done that research myself, the same way I did every transaction for my clients, and I had been right. No, I was not doing the arithmetic because I needed the money. I was doing it because I needed to understand, once and for all, what this family's picture of me actually was. And once I understood it clearly, I needed to decide whether I was going to keep showing up for dinners at which that picture was the wallpaper, or whether I was going to do something else entirely. I decided to do something else. I just did not tell anyone. The consultancy had been my professional anchor for years by then, but in the 8 months following that wedding, I rebuilt the structure around it. I incorporated properly, with Joyce's guidance and the help of an attorney I had been referred to by a colleague, a sharp and prepared woman named Renata Solis, who I first sat down with in February of 2022. Our first conversation lasted 2 hours and covered more ground than I had expected, including something I had not specifically planned to raise. The question of what happened to assets I held if something happened to me, and whether my parents, as the people I had always listed as secondary contacts on various forms, had any legal standing I had not properly thought through. Renata was direct. She said they did not have any automatic standing, but that standing could be manufactured if certain documents were ambiguous, or if I had not formally structured my estate to reflect my actual intentions. She said a lot of people let default assumptions do the work that actual documents should be doing, and that default assumptions tend to reflect family expectations rather than individual reality. I asked her what she recommended. She told me to start with a will, a trust structure for Camille's assets, and a clear set of beneficiary designations on every account I held. She said she could have a draft ready within 3 weeks. She was not wrong about the timeline. We signed the initial documents on March 8th of that same year. What I did not tell Renata yet, what I was still sorting through myself, was that I had also started to wonder whether the version of me my parents had been carrying was based on something more complicated than just their expectations. My mother had been making small comments for years about resemblance, about temperament, about how I had always been different from Dominic in ways that went beyond personality. I had filed those comments away as the ordinary observations of a woman who cataloged everything, including her children. But they had started adding up to something, and I did not know what to do with the sum yet. I did not do anything with it at that point. I told Joyce to keep the accounts organized and separate. I told Renata to make sure everything was clean and properly documented. I reconfirmed Camille's 529 contributions and added a small automatic increase to the monthly amount. I did my work. I picked Camille up from school. I took her to her appointments with her pediatric occupational therapist, Dr. Yemi Adisa, who had been working with her on some sensory processing things since first grade. I built my life the way I always had, steadily and mostly quietly, and I waited. The thing about secrets is that the longer other people keep them, the larger the explosion when they finally let go. My family had been keeping one for 38 years. I did not know that yet, but I was about to. The spring before that Thanksgiving was when the dynamics shifted enough that I started paying closer attention. Gerald had turned 70 in April, and my mother had started making references to the estate in ways that felt different from before. Not casual mentions, deliberate ones. She talked about the house, a 4-bedroom property in the Claremont foothills that had been in the family since before I was born, and she talked about it the way you talk about something you are in the middle of arranging. Past tense framing, passive voice. Things had been discussed, decisions had been made. The family would be taken care of. I asked her once directly what she meant by that. She said not to worry, that everything would be clear when the time was right. That answer used to send me home in a fog of mild anxiety. This time, it sent me to my phone. I called Renata the next morning and told her I thought there might be something worth knowing about the family estate, and that I wanted to make sure my own documents were fully in order before whatever conversation my parents were building toward actually happened. Renata asked me one question. She said, "Nora, do you know whether you are named in their will?" I said I assumed so. She said assumptions were the most expensive thing a person could carry into an estate situation, and that I should find out, and that if I could not find out through conversation, I should be especially certain that everything I had built independently was protected regardless of what their documents said. I went home that afternoon and I looked at the investment property in Riverside. I looked at the second property, a small duplex I had acquired 18 months after the first. I looked at Camille's college fund, which had grown to just over $83,000 by then. I looked at the trust structure Renata had set up, the one that named me as sole trustee of Camille's assets and designated a successor trustee in the event anything happened to me, a role I had quietly asked Joyce to fill because I trusted her more than I trusted anyone in my family to do it correctly. I was not worried about money. I was worried about something harder to name. Something about what it means when the people who raised you have been carrying a secret large enough to reshape everything, and you have been the only one in the room who did not know it. I want to tell you about 2 moments that summer that nearly gave everything away. Not to me, to them. The first was at my mother's 4th of July gathering. She hosts it every year, and Camille and I always come because Camille loves the backyard and the sparklers and my mother's fruit salad, and it is the one summer event that has never felt loaded. That year it did. Dominic arrived with Beverly and their 2 kids, and after the food was out, he pulled me aside near the back fence and told me in his careful, older brother voice that I should think about what I was going to do if things changed. He was being deliberately vague, the way people are when they think they know something you do not. I asked him what things. He said that Mom and Dad were getting older and that the house was going to need a decision, and that he and Beverly had been talking about it, and that given the differences in our situations, he stopped himself there. I looked at him for a moment. What differences? He opened his mouth, then redirected. Just that you have more flexibility. You know, you can be nimble. Nimble. That was the word. I smiled. That's thoughtful of you, Dom. My voice was even. I appreciate you looking out for me. He seemed satisfied with that. He went back to the grill. What he did not know was that earlier that week, Renata and I had reviewed the full structure of my consulting incorporation and both investment properties, and she had quietly flagged something she wanted me to be aware of. She had pulled the public records on my parents' property as a reference point, the way she sometimes does when advising clients on family estate situations, and she noted that the property's title structure had a feature that was unusual for how long the family had owned it. Not improper, just structured in a way that suggested some deliberate decisions had been made at some point. She could not say more without more information, but she told me to keep her posted. I told her I would. Then I drove home from the 4th of July with Camille asleep in her car seat, and I thought about Dominic's word. Nimble. The second close call came in August, and it was much closer. My mother called me on a Thursday afternoon and asked if I was free that weekend. She said she wanted to go through some of the things in the guest room, old boxes, stored items, and she could use an extra set of hands. I came over Saturday morning. Camille was at a playdate and would not be picked up until late afternoon, so I had the day. We worked through the morning, sorting boxes, setting aside items for donation. Around 11, my mother went to make coffee, and I stayed in the room finishing a box. Inside it, under a stack of old holiday cards, I found a manila envelope that had been resealed with packing tape. It had my name on it in my father's handwriting. I held it in my hands for about 4 seconds. Then I heard my mother's footsteps coming back up the stairs, and I put the envelope back in the box and closed the flap. I did not say anything. She came back in with 2 mugs, and we kept working, and she talked about the neighbor's new fence and whether the donation center was still taking furniture, and I said all the right things, and the entire time I was sitting with the knowledge that there was something in that house with my name on it that I had not been meant to find yet. She patted my arm when I left that afternoon. This was good, she said. We should do this more often. I smiled. Absolutely. I sat in my car in their driveway for 3 minutes before I started the engine. Then I drove to Camille's playdate, picked her up, listened to her talk about everything she and her friend had done, and got us both home. After she was in bed that night, I called Renata and told her what I had found. I did not open the envelope. I did not go back for it. I just told her that there was something in that house with my name on it, that I had not been told about it, and that I thought the conversation my parents had been building toward was coming sooner than I had expected. Renata was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Nora, I think we should do a full review before the holidays. All accounts, all property documents, trust structure, everything. I agreed. We scheduled it for September. By the time September's appointment came, I had also decided something about Camille. Not about her accounts or her trust, those were already clean and clearly documented. I had decided that I was going to be honest with her, in age-appropriate ways, about the fact that our family was complicated. Not the specifics, just the shape of it. That grown-ups sometimes keep things longer than they should, that it was not her job to hold the family together. That whatever happened, she was loved and protected, and the people who were supposed to take care of her had done so, and were still doing so. I had that conversation with her one Sunday morning over breakfast. She was 8 by then, sharp and perceptive the way some children just are, the kind of kid who watches before she speaks and notices the things adults think they are hiding. She listened to me carefully. Then she said, Is something bad going to happen? No, I told her. Something that was already true is just going to become something we talk about. She considered that. Okay, she said, and then she asked if she could have more orange juice, and I said yes, and that was that. Renata's September review confirmed everything was in order. Both properties were cleanly titled in my name. The consulting incorporation was properly structured. The trust for Camille was documented and legally binding, with Joyce named as successor trustee. The college fund had continued to grow. My beneficiary designations on every account were current and unambiguous. On my way out of her office that afternoon, Renata handed me a folder and said, Whatever conversation is coming, you are ready for it. I put the folder in my bag. I thanked her. I drove home the long way, through the neighborhoods I had been watching for 3 years, past the duplex with its new coat of paint, past the corner property I had been tracking for 6 months and was almost ready to move on. Everything I had built was about to be tested in front of the people who had never once asked me about it, and they had no idea what was coming. Thanksgiving that year fell on the 21st of November, and my parents had asked me to arrive Wednesday evening before the rest of the family came Thursday morning. That detail mattered more than I understood at the time. The private conversation, the staging, the careful choreography of a disclosure they had been planning for God knows how long. I drove up Wednesday afternoon with Camille in the back seat, her backpack full of the things she brings everywhere: her sketchbook, her headphones, the small stuffed rabbit she has had since she was 3 that she would deny caring about if you asked her directly. She talked the whole drive about something that had happened at school with her best friend, a disagreement about a game that had apparently resolved itself by lunch, and I listened and asked questions and felt, for those 2 hours on the freeway, completely ordinary. We arrived at 5:30. My mother met us at the door with her arms open, and Camille ran into them the way she always does, easy and unself-conscious, still small enough that my mother could fold around her completely. My father came out from the kitchen wiping his hands on a dish towel and he hugged me, and I noticed that he held on a beat longer than usual. I noticed it and I filed it. The house smelled like the rosemary chicken my mother always made on the night before Thanksgiving, the same meal she had cooked every year for as long as I could remember, and I set my bag down in the front hallway and felt the particular weight of that house settle over me. The weight of every holiday I had spent in it. Every quiet dinner during which I had smiled and deflected and driven home 3 hours later knowing I had left the real version of myself in my car. My mother poured wine. My father set out the food. Camille ate half a plate and then asked, the way she always did, if she could go upstairs, and I said yes, and I walked her up and tucked her into the guest room and told her I would come check on her later. She asked how long I would be downstairs, and I said probably a couple of hours. She said okay and pulled her rabbit into the crook of her arm and closed her eyes. I went back downstairs. I sat at the table. My parents sat across from me. The wine was poured. The food was there. And then my father looked at my mother and she gave him a small nod and he turned back to me and said, "Nora, we need to tell you something we should have told you a long time ago." I put my fork down. My mother folded her hands on the table. She looked at them while she spoke, not at me. She told me they had always planned to tell me when I was old enough to understand. Then they had planned to tell me when I was settled. Then they had planned to tell me when the time was right, and somehow the time was never quite right, and now there was the matter of the estate, and things needed to be clarified before they could move forward with the documents. And then my father said it. "Nora, you were adopted. Your biological parents abandoned you when you were 4 days old. We have known your whole life. You didn't know. I'm sorry we kept this from you for so long." My mother added something then, and it was the part that landed the hardest, the part I have gone back to more times than I can count. She said that my biological parents had no means and no intention of keeping me. She used the phrase abandoned you, the same phrase my father had used, and the repetition of it felt deliberate in a way I could not fully articulate in the moment. Like they had rehearsed this. Like they had agreed on that particular word. I did not scream. I did not cry. I sat very still and I felt the entire architecture of my childhood rearrange itself silently, the way a building looks the same from outside right after the supports have shifted, before any of the cracks have shown up on the walls. I stood up slowly. My mother reached forward. "Nora," I held up one hand, not angry, just signaling that I needed a moment. I walked toward the staircase with the vague idea of getting distance, of getting to a window, of standing somewhere that was not that table. My legs were doing the thinking, and that is when I saw her. Camille, sitting at the very top of the stairs in her socks, both knees drawn up to her chest, her rabbit pressed flat against her shins. Her face was half in the shadow of the hallway and half in the light coming from below, and she was looking straight down at me with an expression that I had never seen on her 8-year-old face before. Something very still and very careful and completely awake. She had not been asleep. She had heard everything. She whispered one word. "Mama." There was a question in it, but not the question you might expect. She was not asking if I was okay. She was not asking what adoption meant. She was asking, in the way that children sometimes ask with a single syllable what adults cannot ask with a paragraph, whether I was still the same person she had climbed into the car with that afternoon. Whether the ground was still the ground, I put my foot on the first step. "Come here, baby." She came down the stairs fast, the rabbit bumping against her side, and I caught her at the bottom and held her for a long moment with my hand on the back of her head. She did not say anything else. She did not ask questions. She just stayed there, and I stayed there, and after about 30 seconds she pulled back enough to look up at me and said, "Your face is doing the thing." "What thing?" "The thing where you're not going to cry, but you kind of want to." I almost laughed. I pressed my forehead against hers. "Go back upstairs, I'll be up in a little while." She looked past me toward the dining room. "Are Grandma and Grandpa in trouble?" "I don't know yet, go upstairs." She went. I stood at the bottom of the staircase for a moment with my hand on the newel post. Then I turned around, walked back to the dining room, and sat down. My mother was pressing her fingertips together. My father was looking at the table. I said, "When you mentioned the estate, what did you mean specifically?" My mother looked up. A pause. "We wanted you to understand the full picture before we updated the documents." "Updated them how?" My father cleared his throat. "The house is structured as a family trust. It has always been intended for blood heirs. Now that you know the full situation, we thought you would want to know where things stand." I looked at him for a long moment. "You're telling me that now that you've told me I'm adopted, you're also telling me I'm not in the trust." Neither of them answered immediately. My mother said, very carefully, "Dominic has always been the primary heir. That hasn't changed, but we wanted you to have the truth before the documents were finalized." My voice was even. "So this conversation is not just about giving me peace of mind. It's about paperwork." My father looked at my mother. She wouldn't look back. I reached into my bag. I had brought it to the table out of habit, the same way I always keep it close, and I set it in my lap and I thought about Renata's September call. About the folder she had handed me on my way out. About everything I had quietly, methodically put in order over the past 3 years. I pulled out my phone. I opened my contacts. I found Renata's name. I sent her a text that said 3 words, "Moving up timeline." She responded in under 2 minutes, "Ready." "Call when you can." I set the phone face down on the table. My mother was watching me. My father was still looking at the tablecloth. "I would like to come back tomorrow," I said. "With the family here, I want to have this conversation when everyone is present." My mother's expression shifted slightly, not alarmed, cautious. "Nora, I think this is a private matter. It affects the family." I stood up and picked up my bag. "I'll be here for 11. Don't make any calls tonight, please. Whatever you were planning to tell Dominic, wait until tomorrow." I went upstairs. I checked on Camille, who was back in the guest room but very much awake, and I lay down next to her on top of the covers and stared at the ceiling until her breathing slowed and evened out. Then I lay there for another hour, not sleeping, doing arithmetic that had nothing to do with money. 38 years. A 4-day-old infant. An envelope in a box with my name and my father's handwriting, sealed and stored and waiting for a moment that kept being pushed back. 2 parents who loved me, I believed that, who also spent 38 years managing what I knew about myself with the same careful attention they gave to the estate documents, who had come to this conversation now not because they had finally gathered the courage, but because the paperwork required it. That was the part I kept returning to, not the adoption itself, the timing. I called Renata at 6:45 Thursday morning before Camille woke up. I walked to the backyard into the cold November air and I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for 3 seconds. "The trust structure," she said. "Do you know which attorney drafted it?" "No, but I know there's an envelope in that house with my name on it that I've never been allowed to open." "Okay." Her voice was steady, the way it always was when she was already 3 steps ahead. "Here is what I need you to do this morning. Before you go over there, I need you to write down everything they said last night, as close to verbatim as you can manage, the specific language, the phrase blood heirs, every word, and then I need you to call me back from the car before you go inside." I went back upstairs and wrote 2 pages of notes in the margin of Camille's sketchbook, on a page she had left blank at the back. I wrote down every word I could reconstruct. Then I closed the sketchbook and went to make coffee, and when Camille came downstairs at 7:30, I poured her cereal and we sat at my parents' kitchen table together while my mother moved around us making preparations for the Thanksgiving meal that none of us were going to eat. My father kept glancing at me. I kept my expression neutral and asked Camille what she wanted to draw after breakfast. She said, "A map." I asked her of what. "I don't know yet," she said. "I'll figure it out when I start." Dominic arrived at 9:45 with Beverly and their 2 kids. Beverly had brought a pie and a casserole dish, and she moved through the kitchen efficiently, the way she always did, setting things down and finding places for them. She was warm and capable, and she kissed my cheek when she saw me and asked if I was feeling all right because I looked like I hadn't slept, which I had not. Dominic shook my hand. He always shakes my hand at family gatherings, which has always struck me as an oddly formal gesture between siblings, but that was Dominic. He was wearing a good shirt, and he had the slightly important air he put on when he expected to be the center of something. He looked at our mother when he came in, a quick searching look, and she gave him a small nod. They had spoken already. Despite what I had asked, they had spoken. I did not react to that. I excused myself to use the restroom, and I called Renata from the hallway instead. They already talked to him, I told her. Then he knows what they plan to tell you. She did not sound surprised. Does he know that you know? I don't think he knows what I have. Good. When it starts, let them lead. Do not reveal anything until they have fully committed to their position. Once they've stated it in front of witnesses, then you move. I went back to the living room. Camille had found her cousin, and they were on the floor with the sketchbook, drawing together, and I watched them for a moment and felt something steady in my chest that had not been there since the night before. Whatever happened in the next hour, that image was going to stay with me. The family gathered at 11, the way I had asked. My mother had set out coffee and the good china cups, which told me she was treating this as an occasion she wanted to manage. Gerald sat at the head of the table. Lorraine sat beside him. Dominic and Beverly sat to the right. I sat across from them, alone on my side of the table, with my bag on the chair beside me and my phone face down in front of me. My mother opened by saying this was a family conversation and that she hoped everyone could approach it with maturity and love. She used the word love twice in the opening sentence. Then she looked at me and said, "Nora, your father and I told you something important last night. We thought it would be best for everyone to understand the situation together so there are no misunderstandings going forward." Dominic leaned back in his chair slightly. He had the posture of a man who already knew which way this was going. "The trust," he said, addressing me more than our parents, "has always been structured for the family. Mom and Dad built what they built for their children, their biological children." He paused. "That's not a comment on you, it's just what the documents say." I looked at him. "Who drafted those documents?" He glanced at our father. "Leonard Howell. He's been the family's estate attorney for 20 years. "And when were they last updated?" My mother set her coffee cup down with slightly too much force. "Nora, we're not here to go through legal minutiae. You brought up the estate." My voice was calm, not cold, just precise. "If the conversation is about documents, then the documents matter." Dominic tried a different angle. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, and spoke in his measured voice, the one he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. "Here is the thing. Mom and Dad gave us both everything they could. You had the same upbringing I had. The same opportunities. The house is one asset. It doesn't change what this family is. It changes what the estate is," I said. Beverly was very still across the table. She had her hands folded in her lap, and she was looking at the centerpiece and not at any of us. She had the expression of someone who had been told this would be simple and was now recalibrating. My mother tried again. "Nora, we love you. That has never been in question. But you have to understand that there are legal realities we cannot simply rewrite because feelings are involved. The trust was established for blood heirs. Now that you know the truth about your birth, it would actually be dishonest of us to pretend the documents say something they don't." That word, dishonest, coming from the woman who had waited 38 years. I let it sit for a moment. Then I reached into my bag. I pulled out a folder. I set it on the table in front of me and I left it closed. "I want to ask you something," I said to my mother. "When you told me last night that my biological parents abandoned me, was that the language that was used in the original paperwork? Or is that the way you chose to characterize it?" She opened her mouth, closed it. "Because abandoned is a specific word," I continued. "And it carries a specific implication, that I was unwanted, that whatever I came from, it wasn't worth claiming. I'd like to know whether that word was in a document or whether it was the story you chose to tell me." Nobody spoke. For a full 4 seconds, the table was completely quiet except for the distant sound of children in the other room. My father was the one who broke it. "We only ever wanted to protect you from. I'm not asking about protection." I kept my voice level. "I'm asking about accuracy. There's a difference." Dominic cut in. "Nora, I hear you, I really do. But can we stay focused on what actually needs to happen here? There's a house. There's an estate. There are real decisions that have to be made. Getting into semantics about how something was phrased 30 years ago doesn't change." I opened the folder. "If you are still with me, stay. Because what came next is why I spent 3 years building everything I built." The first page was a copy of the property deed for my primary residence, the house I had purchased on my own, in my own name, 4 years earlier. A 3-bedroom property in a neighborhood that had increased in assessed value by just over 40% since purchase. The current estimated value was $480,000. I slid it across the table. That is mine, in my name only, no family connection. Dominic picked it up. He looked at it. He set it down. Something shifted in his posture, a very small tightening, like he had taken a breath and not fully let it out. My mother looked at the page without touching it. I didn't know you owned property. I know you didn't. The second page was a summary document from Joyce, my accountant, showing the structure of my consulting incorporation, the 3 years of revenue figures, and the current business valuation. I did not hand them that page. I left it in the folder and I described it out loud. I told them that my consultancy had been generating consistent 6-figure annual income for 3 consecutive years and had been formally incorporated for 2. I told them that I had 2 investment properties, one of them generating rental income. I told them the college fund for Camille contained $83,000 and was held in a trust structure that no one in this room had any access to or legal standing over. I watched my brother's face as I spoke. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. My mother's hand went to her necklace, a small gold chain she always wore, and stayed there. You've been running a business, Dominic said slowly. For how long? 4 years incorporated, 6 years total. And you never, he stopped. I never mentioned it, no. He looked at Beverly. She was now looking at me and there was something in her expression that was not quite hostility and not quite admiration. Something in between, careful and assessing. My mother released the necklace. Nora, why would you hide something like that from your family? The word hide. I had been waiting for that one. I didn't hide it, I said. I just didn't announce it. There's a difference. The same way there's a difference between not telling your daughter the truth about her origins for 38 years and actively concealing it. I let that land. Both things stayed quiet, both had reasons. My father looked at his hands. Dominic leaned forward. Okay, I hear you, that's okay. But what does this have to do with the trust? You have your own assets. The family trust is the family trust. They're separate things. They are separate, I agreed. I want to understand something before we discuss the trust. Last night, Dad used the phrase blood heirs. Mom used it this morning. Dominic, you used it just now. So I need to know, is that language from the actual trust documents, or is that the family's interpretation of the intent? Dominic glanced at our mother. She set her cup down again, more carefully this time. The trust was structured with the family bloodline in mind. That was always the intent. That's not what I asked. I kept my voice steady. I asked whether the phrase blood heirs appears in the documents, because intent and language are not the same thing. If the documents actually use that language, I want to see them. If they don't, if this is the family's characterization of what the documents mean, then that is a very different conversation. A pause. My mother looked at my father. He looked at the table. In that pause, I watched Dominic's confidence shift. It was not dramatic. It was the very quiet change of a man who has been holding a card he believed was unbeatable and is now, for the first time, uncertain about its value. He tapped his fingers once on the table and stopped. Beverly spoke for the first time, very quietly, without looking up from the table. Did anyone actually review the documents recently? Nobody answered her. I opened the folder to the 3rd page. It was a 1-page summary that Renata had prepared after pulling the public record on my parents' property. Not the trust itself, that was a private document I had no access to. But the public record showed the title structure, and Renata had annotated it with 3 observations she considered relevant. The first was that the property had been red-idled within the past 4 years. The second was that the red-idling had occurred after a refinance. The third was a note that said, red-idling during refinance sometimes inadvertently severs or alters trust provisions. Recommend independent legal review before any distribution decisions. I slid that page to the center of the table. My mother picked it up. She read it. The color started to drain from her face, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the slow, steady way of a woman who has just understood that something she believed was fixed may not be. Where did you get this? My attorney pulled the public record. I said it simply. She thought it was relevant. Dominic took the page from our mother. He read it again. Then he set it down with a very controlled motion, the kind of deliberate stillness that takes effort. You have an attorney, he said. I have had an attorney since February of 2022. A silence, real this time, not just a pause between sentences. My father said, quietly, "You came here prepared." "I came here for Thanksgiving." I looked at him directly. "You're the ones who called me in early. You're the ones who had a conversation you had been planning for months." I just didn't arrive empty-handed. Beverly let out a slow breath. She was not on anyone's side in that moment. I could see it in the way she was holding herself, back straight, hands still, looking at the page in front of Dominic the way someone looks at a problem they did not sign up for. My mother tried to recover. She put both hands flat on the table and lifted her chin slightly. "Nora, whatever your attorney found in a public record, the family's intentions are clear. We raised you. We loved you, and the trust reflects the decisions your father and I made for our family. Those decisions do not change because you have built a successful career." "I agree with you," I said. She blinked. That was not the response she expected. "The trust reflects your decisions," I continued. "And I am not here to argue about what you decided or why. I am here because you invited me for a private conversation the night before Thanksgiving, told me for the first time in my 38 years of life that I was adopted, used the word abandoned to describe my biological parents, and then in the same breath told me the information was relevant to estate paperwork. I want to be accurate about the sequence of events." My mother's hand went back to her necklace. "I am also here," I went on, "because my daughter heard that conversation from the top of those stairs last night. She is 8 years old. She heard the word abandoned applied to her mother's origins before her mother did. And I want everyone at this table to understand clearly that whatever I have or haven't said over the past 38 years about this family's assessments of me, that is the line." The room went the kind of quiet that has texture to it. Dominic looked at his mother. His mother was looking at me. Beverly was very still. "She was supposed to be asleep," my mother said. It came out smaller than she intended. "She was a child who heard something that confused and frightened her." My voice did not waver. And the first word out of her mouth was my name. "So whatever we are sorting out about trust documents and bloodlines, and the choices you made without telling me, I need you to understand that the reason I am sitting here calmly instead of doing something else entirely is because I am choosing to be calm. I am choosing it. It is not my default in this moment." My father looked up from the table for the first time in several minutes. He looked at me the way he had when he held on too long at the door the night before, with something in it that was not quite guilt and not quite grief, but was somewhere in the geography between them. "Nora," his voice was rough, "I don't think any of us imagined it going this way. I know you didn't, and I meant it. But it did, so now we are here." I pulled the folder back toward me and closed it. Then I set my phone on the table, face up, and I said, "My attorney is available by phone this morning if there are questions about what the public records indicate regarding the property title. She is not here to threaten anyone. She is here because I asked her to be available and because I believe in handling things through the right channels." Dominic's composure, which had been reassembling itself gradually across the last several minutes, cracked again. Not dramatically. It was the way a very composed person cracks, a tightening around the eyes, a jaw muscle that moves once. "You had your attorney on standby," he said, "for Thanksgiving, for a conversation I knew was coming." I met his look steadily. "You had hours on standby when you gifted yourself and Beverly $200,000 toward a house without mentioning it to me. I found out from Aunt Celia at the reception. Different preparations. Same principle." Beverly's chin came up slightly. I watched her absorb that number and file it somewhere. My mother pressed both palms together. "That was a private family decision, so is this one." I kept my voice level. "Everything in this room is a private family decision. I just want mine to be as well documented as yours." Nobody moved for a moment. Then Beverly set her napkin on the table, very neatly, and said, "I think we need to take a break." It was the most sensible thing anyone had said all morning. My mother stood up too fast and moved toward the kitchen. My father followed her slowly, and I watched him go and felt something I had not expected to feel, not satisfaction, not anger, but a kind of sorrow that was very clean and very specific. For the father who loved me the way good but limited people love things they do not fully understand. For the 38 years I had sat at his table and never known what he was holding. Dominic stayed in his chair. He looked at me across the empty table. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked. "I have not been planning anything," I said. "I have been preparing. There is a difference." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "The business, the properties, Joyce or whoever your accountant is, the attorney." He shook his head slowly. "I had no idea." "I know. Why didn't you say anything to me specifically? We could have..." "What?" I asked. Genuinely, what would we have done differently? He did not have an answer for that. Beverly touched his arm. He looked at her, and something passed between them that I was not meant to read. Then he pushed back from the table and followed her toward the kitchen, and I was alone in the dining room with the folder in front of me and the sounds of children playing in the next room and the smell of a Thanksgiving meal that was going to go mostly uneat. I sat there for a moment and let myself feel it. Not the victory of it, there was no victory in any of this, but the solidness of it. The specific relief of having been underestimated for a very long time and finally being in a room where that particular misunderstanding had been corrected, not loudly, not cruelly, but permanently. My hands had stopped their internal trembling. I had been holding tension through my shoulder blades without realizing it, and I felt it release slowly, like a cable going slack. When my parents came back to the table, I was still sitting there. My father sat down heavily. My mother sat down with more control, her posture reassembled, but her hands were in her lap instead of on the table, which told me she had not fully recovered. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, and her voice was different now, not the managed voice she had used all morning but something underneath it, older and less certain, "What do you need from us, Nora?" It was the most honest question she had asked since I arrived. I thought about it. Not for long. I had been thinking about it for 3 years, really. "I need the documents," I said. "The actual trust documents, not a summary. I need the full language reviewed by Renata so we know exactly what the trust says and what it does not say. I need whatever is in that envelope in the guest room box, the one with my name on it that I found in August. And I need you to answer one question honestly." My mother's eyes moved to my father. He gave a small nod. She looked back at me. "What question?" "The envelope," I said. "What is in it?" A long pause. My father said, "The name of your birth mother." The room was very still. I did not ask the follow-up questions immediately. There were a dozen of them ready and I held them back. I said, "Then I would like it, please, today." My father got up from the table. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, slow and deliberate, and then the sound of the guest room door. He was gone for several minutes. When he came back, he set the envelope on the table in front of me. The same one I had found in August, with my name in his handwriting. I put it in my bag, not in the folder, in my bag against my side where I could feel it. My mother said, very quietly, "Are you going to tell Camille?" I looked at her. "I'm going to tell Camille what is true and what she is old enough to understand. The same thing I should have been told when I was old enough to understand it." She looked at the table. Then I said the thing I had been deciding whether to say since Renata's September meeting, the thing I had gone back and forth on a dozen times, the thing that was not about leverage or documents or estate planning, but about something more basic. "I don't know yet what I want the relationship to look like going forward. I'm not ending it today, but I am not pretending that last night and this morning didn't happen. You told me a true thing. Then you told it to me in the service of a legal document. I need some time to figure out which one of those facts matters more to me." Nobody argued with that. Dominic came back to the doorway then. He looked at me, and then at our parents, and then back at me. "What happens now?" I stood up and picked up my bag. "Now I'm going to go check on Camille, and in a little while I'm going to drive home, and next week I'm going to call Renata and find out what the trust documents actually say." I looked at my mother and then my father. If there are decisions to be made, we will make them properly, through the right channels, with everyone's documentation on the table. Not at a dinner. Not in a conversation staged for the night before a holiday. My mother stood up when I did. For a moment she looked like she was going to say something, and then she did not say it. She reached out and touched my arm, just briefly, with 2 fingers, the way she used to when I was small, and she was trying to tell me something she did not have the words for. I let it be what it was, then I went upstairs. Camille was in the guest room, finished with the map she had been drawing. She held it up when I came in. It was a drawing of our house, our actual house, in our neighborhood, with my car in the driveway and her bedroom window labeled in her handwriting and a small figure standing at the front door that she said was me. "I drew it from memory," she said, "to see if I could." I sat on the edge of the bed. I looked at the map for a long moment. "That's really good," I told her. She looked at it critically. "The car isn't right. It's close enough." She folded it and put it in her backpack. Then she looked at me with the directness she had always had, the quality that had made her pediatric occupational therapist Dr. Addisa describe her once as a child with an unusually developed sense of other people's internal states, which was the clinical way of saying she always knew when something was happening in a room even when the adults thought they were hiding it. "Are we going home now?" she asked. "Soon," she said. "Okay." And then, after a pause, "Mama, are you different now than you were yesterday?" I thought about how to answer that. I know something now that I didn't know yesterday. Does it change things? Some things, not the important ones. She seemed to accept that. She pulled her backpack onto her shoulders and looked toward the door. "Can we stop for food on the way?" "I don't think I want Thanksgiving dinner here." I stood up. "Yeah, we can stop." She took my hand at the top of the stairs and held it all the way down. My parents were in the living room when we came through. Dominic and Beverly were in the kitchen. Camille said goodbye to her grandmother with a hug that was genuine and uncomplicated, the way children can do things adults cannot, holding on to their own version of someone independent of the version the adults are negotiating. She waved at my father. She called goodbye to her cousins. Then we walked out the front door into the cold November air, and I buckled her into the car and I started the engine and we drove away. I called Renata from the car once Camille had her headphones on and was looking out the window. "How did it go?" Renata asked. "I have the envelope," I said, "and they know everything." "Everything? The properties, the business, the trust review, they know about you." She was quiet for a moment. And the tone. "Nobody lost control. Nobody said anything they can't recover from." I paused. "I don't know if that's good or not yet." "It's good," she said. "Clean confrontations are easier to build from. I'll reach out to Leonard Howell's office Monday morning and request the full trust documents. You have standing to request them as a named beneficiary, regardless of what the family claims the language says. They never actually confirmed the language says blood heirs." "I know." "That tells me what I need to know." I could hear her writing. "I'll also want to follow up on the red idling issue. If the trust was inadvertently severed when they refinanced, the property may be distributable outside the original trust structure entirely. That's a significant detail." "How significant?" "Possibly very. I'll know more once I see the documents." I thanked her and let her go. Camille had her head tilted against the window, watching the highway shoulder go by. She had taken one earbud out while I was on the phone, the way she always did when she was listening without wanting me to know she was listening, and now she put it back. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, Renata confirmed what she had suspected. The refinance 4 years earlier had, in fact, severed the original trust provisions from the property title due to an oversight in the retitling documents. Leonard Howell's office had apparently missed it. The house was no longer technically held in the trust at all, which meant the blood heir language in the original trust document was no longer operative with respect to the property itself. As far as the law was concerned, my parents owned the house outright and free of trust constraints, which meant they could leave it to whomever they chose, and any claim that it was legally designated only for Dominic was simply not accurate. Renata presented this to my parents through a formal letter in early December. Leonard Howell confirmed her reading after reviewing the documents himself. There were several phone calls between attorneys that I was not part of, and then there were conversations between my parents and me that were uncomfortable and honest in the way that some conversations can only be after a long time spent avoiding them. My parents did not rewrite their entire estate plan in my favor. That was not what I wanted or asked for. What I asked for was that the documents accurately reflect what was actually true rather than a family mythology about bloodlines that did not match the legal reality. In February of the following year, Leonard Howell drafted a revised estate plan that acknowledged me as a full heir alongside Dominic, with a specific provision for a portion of the estate to be held in trust for Camille under the same structure Renata had built for her college fund. Dominic did not take that news easily. He and Beverly went through 2 months of barely speaking to me, which mostly felt like a continuation of the dynamic we had always had, just made explicit. By spring, Beverly had called me directly, not Dominic, Beverly, and asked if we could have lunch. We did. She was practical and clear-eyed in the way she always had been, and she said she thought the outcome was fair and that Dominic would get there eventually. He did slowly in the specific way that proud people get to fairness, reluctantly and without ever saying the word sorry, but with a gradual return to normalcy that functions as the same thing. My parents and I have had several conversations since Thanksgiving about the adoption, not all of them comfortable. The name in the envelope was a woman named Delphine Marsh, who my parents' attorney had on record from the original agency. I have not contacted her. I may. I am not in a hurry. The question of who I came from is interesting and important, but it is not urgent, because the question of who I am has never actually been uncertain, not to me, and not to Camille. Camille had her birthday party in March. a small one at our house with her closest school friends, including the one who had the argument about the game that resolved by lunch. Dr. Addisa noted at her last appointment that she was doing beautifully. She finished the year with strong marks and a portfolio of maps she had drawn from memory of every place we had been together, organized in a binder she decorated herself. She has not asked about the Thanksgiving conversation again, not directly. Once, in February, she asked me whether Grandma Lorraine and Grandpa Gerald were still our family, and I told her yes, that family was a complicated word that had a lot of meanings, and that ours included people who had made mistakes and were working on them, which was true of most families worth keeping. She said that made sense. She asked if we were going to see them for Easter. I said yes. She said good and went back to her homework. The duplex is under new management and generating steady income. The Riverside property has continued to appreciate. Renata and Joyce both tell me my financial structure is in excellent shape and that there is nothing left in it that anyone can reach without going through several layers of documentation that clearly say, this belongs to Nora Scott and to the people she has designated. My mother calls every Sunday now. Sometimes we talk for 20 minutes, sometimes for an hour. We do not talk about the night before Thanksgiving. We talk about Camille and my work, and occasionally she asks about the properties in a tone of genuine curiosity that is different from anything she used to ask in a tone of gentle management. My father says less, as always, but he says it more directly now, and that is something. I do not need them to be different people. I needed them to be honest, and that, slowly and imperfectly, they are learning to be. So, did I go too far, or not far enough? I have my own answer. I want to hear yours.